Hello there, friendly neighbors, and welcome back to my channel. My scrunchie does not match my shirt, and it's bothering me. But, I only have this scrunchie, because I can't find my other ones, because someone, I'm not going to name names, likes to steal my scrunchies. It's Andromeda. I'm naming names. Meal plans. I changed mine again, because I keep doing that. But you know what? I think that's relatively normal for raw feeders. We're constantly learning things, we're constantly changing things. That's okay. This is, I think, the third video I have made on what I feed my ferrets and meal prep, meal planning, that sort of stuff. And I'm probably gonna end up making more in the future as it changes, again, because I lack consistency in my life, but that's okay. I still love myself. You know, that's what's important. I talked about my change from feeding Frankenprey to feeding grinds back when I did my unpopular ferret care opinions video. So my old meal prep, if you've seen my old video, used to be something like this. And now my meal prep is more like this. Good stuff, good stuff. There's a little tiny bit more to it than that, but essentially those are the comparisons we're making in regards to how much more convenient my life is now. 2 years ago, when I made my first meal prep video, and that was back when I was feeding grinds initially, I made it much more complicated than I needed it to be. I would do this whole process where I defrosted everything and I portioned it into individual meals and I froze it again, and I'm like, oh my god, girl, you don't need to do that, okay? You don't need to do, that's a lot. You don't need to do that. Love yourself more, please, God. I think the reason that I was doing it this way is because I was talking to and watching a lot of raw feeders who live in America and in the States. Most of the raw food you're buying comes in like frozen big blocks, especially if you're buying it from Raw Feeding Miami or My Pet Carnivore. So when you're getting grinds that way, yes, you do need to defrost them and portion them because you're not going to be able to get through this giant block in 3 days, which is how long grinds are good in the fridge for. I don't know. I think that's just a testament to, first off, how much of a small brain I am, and second off, I don't know, just the difference in raw feeding, but depending on where you live. I live in Canada. Oh, my sweater is very Canadian. Now, although I don't feed Frankenprey anymore because it was a huge major inconvenience and I just don't want to do that anymore, I still am glad that I had a period where I was feeding Frankenprey because I learned a lot about feeding ferrets and raw feeding throughout that. So in that regard, yes, I'm glad I fed Frankenprey. And the reason that you're going to see the way I feed grinds now is quite a lot different than the way I used to feed grinds is because of what I learned through feeding Frankenprey, what I've learned about my individual ferrets and their individual needs, and that's it. I made it sound like I was gonna say more things. It was only 2 things. Before we get going on to my meal plan, I do need to just say a really big disclaimer. Raw feeding is complicated. If you are someone who is new to the raw diet, or you are planning to switch your ferrets or any other animals to a raw diet, it is extremely important that you have done as much research as physically possible. What I'm about to talk about today, I think makes raw feeding look a little more simple than it actually is. And the reason it looks simple is because the last 2 years of my life, I've been learning so much about this. I do have several videos on my channel about raw feeding, which I will link below. And as well as that, I'm going to link some of my favorite resources in regards to raw feeding and raw feeding for ferrets. So what I'm saying is do not just copy the meal plan I'm about to go over because that meal plan is specifically for my ferrets and specifically for what I've found works for them. Every ferret is different. Every ferret needs different things in their diet. So this is not a tutorial video. This is just a "Are you curious about what my ferrets eat?" video. Okay, come with me, I'll show you video. Yes. So this is the loose meal plan that I have my ferrets on. I say loose because occasionally I stray from it or do things a little bit differently, but in general, this is sort of what I'm doing with my ferrets. I have it color-coded because I like color-coding things and I think it looks pretty and also it makes it easier to understand. So as far as the grinds, which are the bulk of my ferret's diet, goes, my ferrets are on a mix of Big Country Raw and Carnivora. I go through the pure lamb, country blend, and pure duck. Occasionally I'll get them another one, but those are the main ones that I'm feeding them, along with the chicken diet from Carnivora. But Kenya, what? You said Carnivora was bad in your other video on raw feeding and that you wouldn't feed it to your ferrets. Are you a hypocrite? No, I'm not a hypocrite. I just learned things and changed my opinion. Which is good. Again, watch my unpopular opinions video. I go on a tangent about this. In my old video where I talk about grinds for Canadian raw feeders, I mentioned how Carnivora claims to be whole animal but actually doesn't include the whole animal, and how I think that is misleading and therefore you shouldn't feed it to your ferrets. But one of the main opinions that I have formed in the last year is that no raw diet is perfect. The 80-10-10, aka 70-10-10-5-5 ratio that raw feeders tend to follow is a good ratio, but it's not fully accurate all the time. No animal in real life, no body you find, no matter what kind of animal it is going to perfectly follow that ratio, because every single body is different. Since no body is perfect and no body is ever going to follow that perfect 80-10-10 ratio, variety becomes what's really important with a raw diet. Every different type of animal is going to have a different level of different nutrients depending on the individual type of animal. By providing variety, you are able to fill the gaps where certain foods are going to be lacking in and other foods are going to have extra of. That's how animals survive in the wild. No wild carnivore is strictly eating one type of animal. They are eating a plethora of different types of animals in different life stages and in different seasons, therefore different levels of fat and protein and muscle tissue, and it's a variety. I didn't write this part in my script. I went on a tangent again. Because of the variety I'm talking about, personally, I think it's fine for me to be putting Carnivora in the rotation of the food that I'm feeding, because first off, they're eating more than just Carnivora, they're also eating other foods, and second off, you will see that there are certain things I'm adding into my diet to make up for the things that Carnivora might possibly be lacking in. I choose the mix of grinds that I pick for my ferrets because I personally think that they complement each other pretty well, especially in regards to my specific ferrets. The Big Country Raw Pure Lamb grind does follow the 80-10-10 ratio, and as well as that, it contains tripe. Tripe is a really awesome thing to get into your ferret's diet because it contains a lot of natural manganese. Manganese is something that a wild ferret would be getting from the fur and feathers of an animal that they are eating. So by feeding tripe, you are supplementing the fact that they may or may not be eating that. And additionally, tripe is a really awesome natural probiotic, and what a probiotic does is it helps maintain the natural bacteria levels in your ferret's stomach, which is used to help break down food. According to Big Country Raw, the grinds they have with tripe contain anywhere from 10 to 20% tripe depending on the individual batch. Red meats are something that my ferrets really don't like. I've tried them on a lot of different ones: beef, goat, pork. They are not a fan. Lamb is the one that I have sort of managed to convince them to eat, provided that I add a magical ingredient to it, which I'll be talking about later. The country blend, just like the pure lamb, does follow the 80-10-10 ratio. The difference between the country blend and the pure lamb is where the pure lamb is pure lamb, the country blend is turkey meat, and then the organ and tripe and bone in it are all beef. I also feed them the pure duck, which almost follows the 80-10-10 ratio, but they consider gizzard to be secreting organ, which it is not. Gizzard is a muscle meat. I have no idea why so many raw companies consider it to be organ, because that's just not what it is. So because of that, I add offal into my meal plan in order to add that extra organ that they are missing, which is something I'm going to talk about later. Like I talked about earlier, the carnivore chicken diet is labeled as whole chicken, but the chicken diet doesn't contain the head, feet, stomach, crops, intestines, or feathers. So it's missing a couple bits of the chicken, making it not necessarily whole chicken. According to Carnivora, their grinds are around 7% bone, 10% organ, 10% blood, 10% fat, and 60% muscle meat. I have noticed that my ferrets get pretty runny poops when they're eating only Carnivora, and this is because of that 7% bone as opposed to the 10% bone that is in the Big Country Raw. 7% just evidently isn't enough for my ferrets personally, but I fixed this problem by feeding raw meaty bones alongside the Carnivora, which I'll talk about in a minute here. An important part of my meal plan is that I do not feed my ferrets a different grind every single meal. The grinds that I feed are portioned into 1 pound blocks, so because of that, I just pull a 1 pound block out of the fridge and I feed it to my ferrets for the 3 to 4 meals that normally lasts them. Grinds are perfectly fine to stay in the fridge so long as they're sealed and they aren't in there for more than 3 days, so it just makes more sense for me to be feeding that way as opposed to de-thawing them, portioning them, refreezing them just to re-de-thaw them. I don't have time for that, I don't want to do that, and it is not necessary. So because of that, my ferrets don't actually get all 4 of these in a week. They're normally eating 2 or 3 of them per week, but it rotates every week, and that's what's important. The next thing on my meal plan is raw meaty bones, which I just mentioned. Every week my girls get 2 meals of chicken wing tips and 1 meal of dressed quail. I choose to feed these because my girls are a little lazy and they really don't like eating neck or anything that thick, so I have to go with bones that are a little bit thinner to get them to actually eat them. Also, Andromeda is pretty prone to biting off more than she can chew in the most literal sense, and she's gotten bone stuck between her molars pretty often, so I prefer to go with less dense bone to prevent that from happening. She's just really hungry all the time. I'm not gonna shame her for that, you know? I love feeding dressed quail because, first off, I just think they're kind of cute. They're like little mini turkeys, except it's a quail. Ideally, I would love to feed my ferrets all 3 of their meals as dressed quail, but quail's just expensive, so because of that, I add in the chicken wing tips. I add bones for 2 different reasons. The first being oral health. Grinds are super, super bad for your ferret's teeth. They're basically just like a sludge that your ferrets kind of just like lick up. And because of that, lots of plaque is going to build on their teeth when they're on a diet of only grinds. Chewing bone is the most natural way for any animal to clean their teeth. The bone scrapes the plaque right off of it. When I first put them back on grinds, I actually only had 1 meal of meaty bones in their diet, and it definitely wasn't enough, so I added 2, still didn't feel like I was quite there. Now that I've added 3, I think their teeth are almost back to where they were when they were on a Frank and Prey diet. This is just another example of how you have to adjust your meal plan according to your individual ferrets, because I have lots of friends who feed their ferrets grinds and they're okay only doing meaty bones once a week. Just depends on your animal. The second reason that I add bones into my ferret's diet is one that I've already mentioned, and that's just that the carnivora chicken diet doesn't have enough bone in it for my ferrets. Because of that, my ferrets get the carnivora chicken food normally on the days where they are eating meaty bones because they just complement each other really well, and by doing that, their stool consistency is pretty normal. When I feed my ferrets their meaty bones, I do cut them up for them because my ferrets are lazy and they will not eat them if they are in too big of pieces, especially with the whole quail. I just feel like if I put down a whole quail, I would just see Andromeda climbing out of the cage with an entire quail, stashing it under my bed. That would be really funny, but I don't want to do that. Although maybe I'll do it once just to see, you know? That'd be really funny. The next thing I add to my meal plan along with my grinds is offal. Offal is basically just a mix of a bunch of different organs and heart. I feed offal for 2 reasons. The first one is just that, like I said earlier, the Big Country Raw Pure Duck is lacking in another organ, so I want to make sure that they are having that for added variety. And the second reason is because of those 3 meals of meaty bones that I'm adding. Those meals pretty much just cut organ out besides the tiny bit of organ in that little scoop of grind I'm giving them with it. So I want to make sure that they're still getting enough organ every week, and that's where the offal comes in. I kind of switch between which offal I'm feeding my ferrets. Sometimes I will just make it myself out of pureed organs that I get from Modern Canine or the grocery store, and other times I will get the Big Country Raw organ blend. This time I got the Canine Choice organ blend for the first time. The reason I went with this one is just because it's really conveniently portioned in these little blocks, so I don't need to spend any time de-thawing it or making my own. I can just pull a block out of the fridge, toss it in my dish, and let it defrost until the next morning when I'm feeding it to my ferrets. It just makes life a little bit easier, and I'm all about making my life easier. Fish is the next thing that I add into my ferret's diet, specifically salmon, just because that's the one that I can find more conveniently. Fish is really awesome to add into your ferret's diet, and regardless of what you're feeding, whether it's Frank and Prey or grinds, I think that you should probably be putting it in there. It's good for them because it adds extra omega fatty acids like omega-3 and omega-6. It's also got vitamin E in it, which is really important, and it's just really good for skin and coat health, and again, just a little bit more variety. Keep in mind though, eating too much fish is bad for ferrets and has been linked to fatty liver disease. But that doesn't mean that it should be completely avoided, it just shouldn't make up a bulk of your ferret's diet. Most ferret raw feeders agree that 1 meal a week is sufficient, and I feed my girls a little bit less than that, but that's just because they don't like fish and I have to force them to eat it when I want them to eat it. I feed my girls the Big Country Raw Pure Salmon. This is just a mix of salmon meat and bones, so it doesn't have any organ in it or anything. But I kind of just use it as a topper. I found this really cute mold at Michael's a few weeks ago, and I've been using it because it makes them into really cute little shapes, and I'm all about that. I know I just said that I like convenience and I don't like doing extra work, but it's worth it for these really adorable fish, okay? Sometimes extra work is necessary when the results are cute. So I just add 2 or 3 of these into my ferret's meal a couple times a week, and that's the fish that they get. They're sort of willing to eat it. And you know, sometimes sort of willing to eat it is as good as you're gonna get when it comes to ferrets. Eggs! Every Saturday morning, my girls get 2 egg yolks and 2 whole eggs all whisked together as their breakfast. And then I follow it with a little bit of grind that I put out for them to snack on throughout the day, just if that egg wasn't enough for them, which it normally isn't. Egg is super, super good to add into your ferret's diet. It has shown anecdotal evidence to aid in the prevention of hairballs, and it's also just packed full of vitamins and omegas and good stuff for your ferrets. Just like fish, you should not be overfeeding egg. The general consensus is 1 egg per ferret per week, and then during shedding seasons, you may choose to increase that to 2 eggs per ferret per week. You can feed just the egg yolk or the whole egg. Just don't feed only the egg white, because that's not where any of the nutrients are. Along with their Saturday morning egg, I do throw in a couple of quail eggs with their grinds a few times a week, just to give them a little bit of, once again, variety. With the quail eggs, I do add the entire quail egg. Ferrets can totally eat the shells of eggs so long as they are free of chemicals or anything that they have been treated with. So I just kind of mush it up and mix everything together and feed it to them, and yeah, extra calcium in the shell. Nothing wrong with that. My girls are picky, and they will not eat their grinds unless they are a kind of soupy, watery consistency. Because of this, I add bone broth in with their meals. I make my bone broth homemade. If you are curious about how to make bone broth, you can look at the video where I made my ferrets a poutine. In that video, I made my bone broth really thick because I wanted it to be the consistency of gravy, but normally I don't add anything to thicken it, and I just let it be as watery as possible. Not only is bone broth tasty, but also it is pretty good for your ferrets. It helps as an immune system booster. It's good for their joint health. People claim it's good for their skin and coat health. It can be used to detox a bunch of other stuff. Honestly, I don't know if I believe all of it. I really just feed it because my ferrets like the taste of it, and if it has bonus extra things that are good about it, who am I to complain? I recently started freezing my bone broth into ice cube trays so that I can just take them out, pop them in with my grinds, and let them de-thaw overnight. Bone broth is good in the fridge for up to 5 days, so I could just have it in little containers and pour it in, but again, I think that this is cuter. And I'm gonna do what's cuter, even if it means a little bit of extra work. Not too much extra work, though. There's a limit to the amount of extra work that doing something cute is worth. You know? It's gotta be a balance. The cuteness versus the extra work, it's gotta level out. The very last thing that I add into my ferret's diet, along with their grinds, is pickle juice. Warning, 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 guys, warning. Not real pickle juice. Don't feed your ferrets pickle juice. Pickle juice is the name of a fish oil supplement that my ferrets adore. I give them a few pumps a week of this with their lamb because, like I said, my ferrets don't really like lamb, so this is one of the only ways that I can get them to actually eat it. Pickle juice is a blend of fish, emu, and pumpkin seed oil. I'm really not a big fan of the fact that it's got vegetable oil in it, but it does make my ferrets eat their food that they would not eat otherwise, so I sort of think, you know what, a little tiny bit of that once a week is gonna be okay. It is not the end of the world. My ferrets really, really don't like salmon oil, which is what I would prefer for them to be eating, so I just kind of make the sacrifice and go with this instead. If you also have a ferret that's really picky, doesn't like salmon oil, I really do recommend giving this a try. It's available on Pickled Ferrets Parlor on Etsy. I'll have a link to their store down below. They do sell really little tiny bottles just as testers to see if your ferret likes it. There's a bunch of other cute stuff on their store, and what I really like is that all of the proceeds on their store do go to a ferret rescue. So whenever I'm buying this for my ferrets, I can rest easy knowing that my money is going to help ferrets in need. And that's it, folks. That's what my ferrets eat. Give or take a little bit. Sometimes it gets adjusted. I'm probably going to change it eventually, but that's the nature of raw feeding. We all change things because we figure out what does and doesn't work for our ferrets. Every morning I prep 2 dishes of food. I prep their dinner for that evening and then breakfast for the following day. I do have to prep it a couple hours early because I have bone broth and then a couple other things sometimes in there that need time to defrost. Though I do add bone broth with every single one of my ferrets' meals, I don't always add offal, salmon, or eggs. It just sort of depends on the day. Like I said, the meal plan I showed you guys was kind of loose in regards to that because if I feel like they don't need any more fish for that certain week, I'm not going to add fish again. Same goes for the offal and the eggs. I'm sure I'll have another meal plan video for you guys within the next 6 months or so adjusting what I'm feeding my ferrets. I already have some things in mind that I want to change and a couple different things that I want to try, but for now, this is what we're at, and my ferrets are doing pretty good on it. Like I said, if you are curious to learn more about raw feeding, I have lots of resources in the description down below. My ferrets have been on a raw diet for 2 years, and I think it is the best diet you can put your ferrets on. But of course, that does not mean that I think everyone should feed it. Again, this is in my unpopular opinions video. I think that feeding a high quality commercial food is completely valid, and if you want to learn more about that, I'm doing a series on how to pick a commercial food for your ferrets. Consider joining my Discord server. We do have dedicated channels for different bits and bobs, and we have lots of different ferret owners with lots of different experiences. So if you want someone to look over your meal plan or be a second opinion on a brand of food that you're planning to feed, drop by, man. It's a good time. We got good vibes. We talk about ferrets. What more is there to like? What more? I don't know. I couldn't think of a single thing. Yeah, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe because by doing all of those things, you too can become a citizen of the friendly neighborhood. I will see you guys next week when I do something. I'm not quite sure what yet because I don't plan that far ahead. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.